George Kilpatrick Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. We are pleased to be joined by Kevin Shird. Kevin is I want to say, an old friend of the program, but we're excited for him to be here. He's an author, he's an advocate, and a change agent. His latest book is called A Life for a Life. Poor Choices and Unresolved Trauma is Killing America. A powerful, unflinching look at the cycles of violence, incarceration, his own incarceration, and trauma that are impacting our communities. Kevin brings forth both lived experience and deep reflection to this conversation. Kevin, we want to say welcome back to the show. And we were just talking earlier that you started with us on the first book, which was A Life of Redemption with the Colored Waiting Room. And then we had the Freddie Gray book. What was the name of that again?
Uprising in the City.
Uprising in the City. So Kevin has been here he's been around the block with Inspiration for the Nation, and we're happy to have him. Before we get to his book, let's talk about what America has been talking about for this past week, and that is the Sean Diddy Combs trial and the verdict. Sean Diddy Combs found guilty on 2 counts related to prostitution, but found not guilty on the more serious charges of racketeering, sex trafficking, etc. And so I thought, since we're talking about trauma and the impact of trauma, what is your thought about this verdict as it came down?
So, amongst other things, this is what it looks like when wealth and addiction collide, right? Yeah. Unlimited amount of whatever this person is dealing with, addiction, whatever they want. Money, drugs, and sex.
And power, right?
And immense power, right? To get people to do whatever it is you want them to do, regardless of what that is. I have 2 thoughts on this. One is the government's overcharging in this case. You see this way too often when it comes to Black defendants in federal court being overcharged, right? What this man was accused of doing and what it looked like, it seems like what he did through the testimony, witnesses, and evidence, assault against women, battery against women, the disrespect of women, and he should definitely be held accountable for his crimes, right? No question about that. He committed some crimes, but he needs to be held accountable. But at the same time, the government's overcharging of Black men in federal court has to come to an end, because Diddy had 10 lawyers. The average guy usually comes in with 1 federal public defender, and more than often, he doesn't win the case. So it's a travesty with respect to how he treated women, but the government's overcharging in federal court cases has to come to an end as well.
You know, one of the things is I said to you before that I have a particular interest as someone who works in the area of violence prevention, intimate partner violence prevention, sexual violence prevention, and sex trafficking prevention. And so to me, what my concern is, and given all that what you just said, but the fact that we are celebrating, like what I'm trying to understand, like what we are actually celebrating, because even the defense attorneys were saying, well, this is not a DV case, even though we know that it's all connected. And so it troubles me that we are so quick, because like the point that you made about the overcharging of Black defendants is probably what has people celebrating, right? That piece. But at the same time, look what happened to people. And, you know, we got to be careful about, oh, well, that was they did it for the money, but we forget about power, control, and fear, and we even saw in the video, right, what
Mhm.
that could look like. So I just think as a community, we got to be real careful because,
Mhm.
like your book, and we're talking about trauma in a different sense, but
Yeah.
what is the impact then of other women who may have been in this experience or have had similar situations,
Mhm. Mhm.
and what do we what do we say to them now? Here's the trump card, and I use that term specifically. You got a convicted felon who had many and multiple accusers that came forward and said that they were sexually assaulted by this person, and
Mhm.
uh, meaning the president of the United States, and the country elected him. And
Yeah.
now there's that piece, right? And I
Yeah.
don't know if you could make the case, but neither one neither one should be glorified, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Absolutely. It's victims' rights in our community need to be respected more. Um, we have to do a better job of covering the victims in our community. Um, that's just and this has been going on for a long time.
yeah,
You know, women who have been harmed, men who have been harmed in our communities, right? We don't do a good job at covering our victims, and we got to do better in that sense. And I hate to talk about overcharging and things like that when the primary focus should be the victims.
right.
But um, this is what the judicial system looks like on the other side when there's no trust.
Mm-hmm.
We don't trust the government with respect to the judicial system. We don't trust the system. And so when the system loses, we tend to celebrate, similar to the O.J. Simpson case, right?
Right, right, right.
I actually had a conversation with the mayor here in Baltimore 10 years ago during the Freddie Gray riots. And I told her, I said, this is what it looks like when the community does not trust the government,
And,
right?
right.
Um,
And for people that don't remember, Freddie Gray was transported in a minivan, and by the time he got to the destination, he was multiple injuries that were
yeah,
unexplained, and he was killed, or he
yeah,
died as a result of that. And so,
that,
for
yeah,
those that don't remember that, and just in case it didn't,
yeah,
uh,
yeah. So this was when you don't trust the government. But even with that said, we still have to do a better job at covering our victims,
you
right?
and so leads me to the title of your book, A Life for Life. Right,
Mhm.
that's a striking title for someone saying that we have to be concerned about victims. What does that mean to you personally, and in the context of this book?
You know what? So a life for life, it actually came from a, a Denzel Washington movie called Man on Fire.
Mm,
And in that movie, Denzel was the protagonist, but he was also a bodyguard and a hired killer. And in the movie, his um, counterpart was a Mexican gentleman that often used the term "a life for life." So he was used the term in Spanish actually, and excuse my poor Spanish, but una puerta verde,
mm,
or something to that effect. And Denzel Washington would shake the guy. I said, "What does that mean? What does that mean?" And he said, "A life for life. When you take a life, you have to give
right,
a life of your own, right?" And so the gentleman that I profile in the book is actually he murdered two people, and now he's serving life plus 35 years in prison.
mm,
And what I said in the book that he took a life and he had to give a life. which was his own,
which is his own. Mm,
which was his own. Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah.
the thing is, you say that poor choices and unresolved trauma is killing America. In the
Mhm.
context of our protagonists here, what kinds of trauma are you referring to, and why do you believe it's being ignored?
So, um, when it comes to the Black community, the community that I spend most of my time in, and I think you spend most of your time in, the issue of mental health hasn't been until recent years. It's
Yeah,
just been an issue that just hasn't been addressed, right? And I could trace it back to the most recent was the Obamacare. So prior to Obamacare, the Black community just didn't have access to mental health services, available access to mental health services. And so the fact that we wasn't utilizing mental health services in our community prior to the Obamacare being enacted, which was only 13 years ago, the fact that we wasn't using it also meant that in our community we didn't talk about it because most of our friends didn't use it, most of our families didn't use it. It wasn't a conversation in our family. Um, Poor choices is tied to unresolved trauma. And we could take it back to the P. Diddy trial or case or his life for that matter. Why would a man
who
take
has everything?
such risks?
Right.
Why would you take such risks? Right? Why would you expose yourself to so much liability? And so talking to a psychologist that I interviewed for the book, he talked about how poor choices is tied to unresolved trauma. And we see that every day in our community.
But would
You
you
know,
say,
we're often left scratching our heads saying, why would that guy do that? You know what I mean?
but I think, and I would add, just thinking about things that I've
Mhm,
seen coming up,
mhm.
we don't even know that that is trauma, right? We take it for granted. I mean, you think about your own life and choices that you made, and now you're
Yeah,
on a life of redemption, right? And
yeah,
so I submit that we often we continue to make those choices because either we haven't resolved what the trauma is, the source of the trauma. Back to what you said, we're not talking to folks, and even if we did, we wouldn't even know what to talk to them about. I would submit.
mhm. No, absolutely, man. And at the end of the day, it boils down to a couple things. It boils down to normalizing conversations like me and you are doing right now around the issue of mental health. So when you normalize those conversations, the people become more educated, people become more aware. Just think about where we were, I don't know, what, 30 some years ago with the HIV issue in America, right? Scary, a lot of misinformation. And what we had to educate the public, not only just to make better choices, but to also alleviate the stigma around that issue, so that people could better understand folks they were dealing with, but also secondhand cigarette smoke.
Mm-hmm.
Remember it was a time where you would sit in a restaurant and the guy right
Oh my
across from
God!
you was smoking it.
Listen, I
Think
used to,
about that.
my first job out of college, I worked for Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I sat next to a guy that was a chain smoker. Yes, I understand and remember that. Thank you, New York State, for having a Clean Air Act, because there's still places, I believe, in the country, in the South particularly, that they still have smoking areas. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know. But you used to be able to smoke on the airplane.
Man, listen, just a couple years ago, I was in Las Vegas and I walked into the lobby and I started smelling cigarette smoke. And I was like, there's no way. And so one of the states you're referring to is Nevada.
Okay.
Um, Chain smoking is a part of chain gambling, is a part of chain drinking. And so they have no they haven't changed much with that regard. But those public awareness campaigns changed our behavior. It changed the way we look at these important issues, and it saved lives. And so I look at this as also the mental health um, there's a mental health crisis in America. That's going to take a public health approach that will eventually have a public safety impact.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. A public safety approach would have a public safety impact, right? And I don't think nobody in their right mind would be against anything that would have a public safety impact, making people safer, right? When we better understand these issues, we better understand each other, and and each of us have not just access to mental health services, but we're using it. We're
So,
using it. We got health care. Use it. You go to the dentist, you use it. Use your health care. Get the support.
Kevin, let me pause for a minute. We're talking Kevin Shird, author of Life for Life. Poor choices and unresolved trauma is killing America. That's pretty stark. Give us the crib note version of your turnaround and your redemption, and how you became an author and advocate, speaking across the country, talking about issues now on the mission for mental health.
Yeah, well, I think most of it started with just understanding the importance of education,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because education has saved the lives of millions of people, but also understanding the importance of it. So when I was serving time, my focus was education. And now I use everything I've learned in those years, everything I gained in those years to do the work that I do now for the last 19 years of just helping people have a better understanding of some real critical issues in our community. And so I started on the journey of writing, and what happened in the midst of that became where writing became therapeutic. So writing became therapy for me. So not only did I have the book knowledge that I of course needed, but also I healed from a
Yeah,
lot of the trauma that I experienced.
yeah.
You know, I'm gonna take you where this journey really began when it came to healing and mental health for me. I've been out of prison maybe a year or two, I believe, and I saw a segment on CNN about how mental health professionals in the U.S. Army were using writing to help soldiers who were in the war in Afghanistan and Iraq heal from the trauma they experienced. So the therapist, U.S. Army therapists, had soldiers from Afghanistan and Iraq returning home write about the friends that they saw being shot and killed in Iraq, write about the bombs that they saw explode and take a man's life, write about the children that were killed in Iraq. And through writing, what they said was through writing, they were able to take those events from here, put them on a piece of paper, and they could have more control of those situations. And so I was like, wow. And they talked about PTSD for the first time when I started to understand post-traumatic stress disorder, a term I wasn't used to hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, wow, it's post-traumatic stress disorder right here in our communities in Baltimore. And so that's what started me on the journey. And then a few years later, I got into therapy and everything started to evolve, you know.
What was the trauma that you had to resolve for yourself?
So, ironically, you brought up lessons of redemption. Ironically, I was actually, I was writing the book and I was writing a scene about a shootout I was in
Mm.
that I've totally forgot about for like 20 years. I hadn't even thought about it for 20 years or more. And then all of a sudden, um, I remembered seeing kids with backpacks on running away. So now I remember that day. It was in broad daylight
Mm-hmm.
and a shootout in broad daylight. And I remember seeing kids with backpacks running. And tears started flowing down my eyes as I was writing the scene.
Mm.
And I told a friend of mine about it. And she said, she's in mental health. And she said, you might have PTSD. And I was like, what the heck is PTSD? and she started to explain, and she said, you might need to see a therapist, and that's what happened. That's what started this whole thing moving, and I'm grateful for it.
So, how do
You
we
know,
balance accountability with compassion and understanding of trauma? Because we often blame individuals without asking what brought them to that moment. And you write about this. How do we balance accountability with compassion?
oh, there has to be in America. We still have this lynch mob mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Lock them up and throw away the key. Um, the truth is, when it comes to incarceration, as mass incarceration in America, 95% of the people that are in prisons will be back in the streets at some point. 95%. And so let remove the compassion component, right? Get rid of it, right? That, I could care less about these guys. Okay, fine. Do we want our streets to be safer? Do we want our society to be safer? Because we're going to end up investing the money one way or the other. We're going to invest in a lot of prisons, or we're going to invest in a lot of healed people. You make the choice, right? And so we're going to have to invest in some way because that will ultimately have an impact on public
So,
safety as well.
let me push into that then real quick. So then we have
Mhm.
a criminal justice system that really makes space for healing. So how do we move toward a model of justice that centers healing, especially for our over-policed, under-supported Black and Brown communities? And what I mean
Mhm.
by that is the compassion level for our
Mhm.
folk isn't there at all, right?
Yep.
We
Yep.
we rarely get the second chance, second opportunity.
hmm So I'll take you back to what the Obama administration did in the second term with the Clemency Project, because I was actually a part of that. I
Mm-hmm.
was on the committee for the Clemency Project, and through that committee, um, the work that was being done to get nonviolent offenders out of prison. So what the Democrats told Republicans was this, right? We know you don't care about formerly incarcerated people. We know you don't care about people turning their lives around. We know you don't care about the marginalized, the sick, and the poor. But what we know you care about is budgets,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if we put together programs that could release non-violent offenders from prisons, guess what? We could start closing prisons and the millions and billions that we're spending on building new federal prisons all across America. We can cut that back. We could
Mm.
also cut back on the operations side. So we won't need 20,000 Bureau of Prison correctional officers, right? When they started to approach it that way, we know you don't care, but we know you care about money. And we know you care about cuts, cuts, cuts. And that was how that ball started rolling. And then after a while, some of them started to cross over and say, you know what? It don't make sense to put a guy in prison for 70 years for a non-violent drug offense.
Mm.
And so a lot of times in negotiations, man, you got to look at what the other person wants
Mm.
as well as what you want, right? And kind of craft your messaging around what the other person wants. We know they know, but so what we're saying now is public health can have an impact on public safety.
We continue our conversation with Kevin Shird. The book is A Life for a Life. Unresolved trauma is killing us. Wait, that's not the subtitle. Give me the subtitle.
Um, poor choices and unresolved trauma is killing them.
Poor choices and unresolved trauma is killing America. And so we talked what so two things I want to get to. One, what do you want people, young readers, any reader, the story of the protagonist in the book, what do you want people to take away and do as a result of your book?
Getting the therapy,
Mm.
getting the therapy, man. It's real simple. We got to start looking at therapy like other cultures have looked at therapy in America. You got an accountant, you got a dentist, you got a primary care doctor, you got a lawyer, and you should have a therapist.
Mm.
It's real simple. It's real simple.
And there's such a movement now to
Mhm.
to get Black men in particular, amongst
Yeah.
everybody, into therapy. Um, how do we get rid of the "I don't need anybody to talk to, I'm strong enough"? How do we get past all of that, and how did you get past all of that?
Just the stigma, getting past this, a better understanding. I think this whole this myth of men have to be strong,
Mm-hmm.
courageous, and yeah, you can be strong and courageous, and there's nothing wrong with that. Um, but you also need a place to vent and let that go and release that, right? Because you're still human. You're a man, but you're still human. And so just normalizing these conversations, making them normal. How do you feel today? How do you feel when you wake up this morning? Um, how do you
Fine.
feel after your mother died, your grandmother died,
Mm.
right? Or your child was sick, right? Or that incident that happened 30 years ago, now you're having nightmares about it. Like real conversations. And again, American society, we've created this myth that men have to be like a Superman, but even Superman got injured a couple times, right? And even Superman needed some help at some point. So just normalizing these conversations. I love to talk about it because it actually made me stronger when I was able to release the baggage I've been carrying around for so many years,
Yeah.
right? It just made me a much stronger. I'm 4 books in and 10 books as a ghostwriter, and we're still going,
But
And I believe without therapy, I wouldn't have got there on my own.
when you talk about what you want to normalize therapy, therapy doesn't isn't cheap, and it's not accessible to everybody. So
Yeah.
what would you like to see to make therapy and therapeutic services accessible? What are the steps that communities can take to make sure that therapy is accessible, so that we can begin on a larger scale to address unresolved trauma, but also
Mhm.
mental health? Because I was in a group the other day, and I heard a lot,
Mhm.
like, I heard things like I don't like relationships. In other words, I heard somebody saying, I'm gonna move from this person to that person. As soon as you act up and don't do what I need, I'm gonna move to this person, and I'm gonna move to this person, right? And it made me think that, like, what do you do with that when you're saying, I don't want to commit, I'm just gonna move on? So I just wonder about what it's gonna take to make, um how do you address somebody who may not even think that these kind of services are accessible for one reason or another? I kind of put two things together there, but I'm basically asking you,
Yeah.
what is your vision of a trauma informed America that has healthcare accessible, especially for Black men? And what role do we play in helping to achieve that vision, where we can get to that point?
It start with policy changes.
Mm.
It start with policy changes around the issue of public health, and Black men fall under that umbrella of public health, right? With specifics as to how a man should perform or how he should act. I don't have all the answers to that because I'm not a therapist, but I'm a storyteller, and I use the story of Damien and myself, and how those two paths merged at some point, but how those two paths were also so different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Policy changes around the issue of public health. You remember the movie I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker, some
Oh
years
yeah,
ago?
yeah. It was a parody.
You remember the scene where the brother, I think it was Antonio Fargas, got out of prison and he had
The 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 the, the fish tank
fish
shoes.
poles.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And do you remember how cool he thought he was? And
Yes.
he thought he was the man. And to the rest of the world, he just looked ridiculous, right? Well, that's actually a term called post-incarceration syndrome.
Mm.
PICS, PICS, post-incarceration syndrome. You can Google it and look it up. It's a form of PTSD that formerly incarcerated people acquire while they're incarcerated, and then they're released, and they struggle like Antonio Fargas did when he was released from prison. And I'm gonna get you, sucker. It's actually a real condition where a guy gets out of prison in 2025, but in his mind, it's 1980, right? How do we expect that man to perform in society? What is expectation? And so I bring it. I say that to say policy changes. One of the things I'm working on is getting. I want to get more mental health therapists in prisons, so
Mm.
that when guys are released, they are healed or on a path to healing. You ever meet a guy that just can't keep a job? He can get hired, but can't keep a job. And for some reason, it's always the supervisor, it's
Yep.
always the
Yep. Yep.
coworker,
Yep. Always the
it's always
girlfriend.
the girl, it's the mother, it's this. And that's the reason why he can't keep a job. Well, it might be something a lot more deeper than that. And we've come accustomed to kind of just um, not willing to go a little deeper when it comes to those kinds of conversations. You know, um, it's a reason behind it. And my work that I did with formerly incarcerated men here in Baltimore 15, 16 years ago, I remember having a caseload of guys that just could not keep a job. I could
Mm.
get you hired, but 6 months later, the supervisor got it in for you, or your coworker got it in for you, or your girlfriend hates you, right? Um, it's oftentimes, man, it's something much more deeper than that, right? And we got to be willing to push people a little bit harder to dig a little bit deeper, you know.
Kevin Shird. The book is called A Life for a Life. Poor Choices and Unresolved Trauma is Killing America. It's available now from Post Hill Press and everywhere books are sold. Kevin, keep doing the work, brother. Thank you for shedding the light. Thank you for your transparency. Thank you for helping us to break the cycles and build something better. We can do it. And I thank you for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. This was great.
George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation.